Hi, my name is Hannah Weber, and I'm here to present about sex offender and sex offender policy. Today, you'll learn about how sex offenders are treated in the criminal justice system and the rationale behind the laws, impact of sexual offenses on the victim, society, and the offender, knowledge on how sex offenders choose to commit their crimes and the location of their crime, how the internet has opened up a huge gate for sex offenders, especially child molesters, current laws and policies in effect for sex crimes, and their results thus far, and thoughts and efforts to prevent future sex crimes. First, sex offender in the criminal justice system. Lawmakers validate special laws for sex offenders with two major arguments: the immense impact of sexual abuse on its victims and society, and the high rates of recidivism by sex offenders. The impact of sexual abuse. Women and children are the most vulnerable victims to sex offenders and sexual abuse. Sexual assaults create substantial psychological harm, especially for victims of rape and child sexual assault. Children who have been sexually abused suffer increased anxiety, depression, somatic complaints, social withdrawal, anger and aggression, substance abuse, as well as sexual behavior problems. Sexual abuse can result in PTSD and disrupt victims for many years. Women and children victims. Quincy Lalaume Rice and Harris of 1995 examined sex offender victim choices and found the following recidivism rates: 23% against women, 18% against heterosexual child molesters, and 34% homosexual child molesters. Risk prevention instruments are important for criminal justice system, society, and victims as a whole to come together and decrease habitual offenders. Sexual offenders pose as high rates of engaging in further offenses after release, and protection from these offenders is a paramount public interest. And that's the intent section of sex offender registration of 1997 in Tennessee's legislature. Many sex offenders who commit horrendous crimes are known for having multiple offenses. Langdon, Schmidt, and DeRose of 2003 found sex offenders have a recidivism rate 5 times greater than non-sexual offenders. The tactics and patterns of a sexual offender. Sex offenders have a different mentality when it comes to committing crimes. Sex offenders who have children victims are usually male. Victim is someone they know, and they find ways to manipulate their victim and gain power and submission. They use threats and intimidation when the victim does not comply to the manipulation. Adolescent offenders tend to use more violence than adult offenders when making their victims submit to them. Surprisingly, the environmental features of the crime are important in the process of selecting a victim, such as indoor or outdoor locations and the knowledge of the location. They sometimes use parks that they are very knowledgeable about, and they sit there all week and target their victim. The target selection is highly dependent on the physical environment, says Cantor and Larkin in 1993. There are 3 different target selection scripts researchers identified when analyzing sexual assault events: coercive, manipulative, and non-persuasive scripts. They include the order of involved decisions and the actions before, during, and after the criminal act is committed. The coercive script has 2 different forms: the home intrusion and the outdoor trap. Home intrusion, the offender uses the victim's house as a core of his action. The counter, the attack, criminal act, and victim release. The offender uses physical violence to make the victim comply and when committing the crime. The outdoor track, the offender uses a public place that both are acquainted with, and the offender uses physical force to get the victim to get to the crime scene. The manipulative script has two forms as well: the sophisticated track and the family infiltrators track. The sophisticated track, the offender uses manipulations, gifts, and gameplay to lure the victim into the place where he will commit the crime. Family infiltrator track, the offender seeks the victim in a family setting or through their job. The offender uses gifts, money, alcohol, and drugs to approach the victim and lead them into the scene. The location of the scene is usually private and inside, typically the offender's house. The non-persuasive script only has one track, the direct action. This offender does not plan a strategy. The offender just directly contacts the victim, lures them to the crime scene, and he's usually in a bar or mall setting. Sex offenders and the internet. The internet has become a huge environment for child molesters to gain access to teens and hide their actual identity. Wallach and colleagues of 2004 found 67% of child molesters met their victims in an online chat room. These offenders earn trust of the teen by telling the teen what they want to hear and plan a face-to-face meeting. The sex offender will sometimes pose as a teenage girl to lure the boys into meeting with them, and they do the same thing to teenage girls as well. Dateline NBC premiered their series of To Catch a Predator in November of 2004, and they investigated 12 situations throughout the United States. The show had many workers who created online accounts to impersonate adolescents who were between the ages of 12 to 15. The offender is lured into the house filled with hidden cameras by a decoy boy or girl who is posing as the person they talk to on the internet. And then here's a clip from the Dateline NBC.
For teen, he doesn't get too specific about sex. Instead, he leaves the subject open.
Get high and watch Family Guy and see where that takes us.
Cool. I kind of like making out when I smoke up, though.
You got anything on your mind?
You too?
Who doesn't?
But later, Ice Truck Killer 103 gets more specific about sex during a phone call. The decoy asks him if he was serious about the hardcore sex, and he says, "We'll see what happens," and then says, "I'm definitely interested. What about you?"
Do you want some brownies? I ate some.
Did you dose them?
What?
Did you dose them?
No. They're really good. I had them before. Did you bring a smoke?
I just roll it up wherever.
Yeah. Let's check it out.
Let's check it out.
He wants the decoy to smell the marijuana he brought.
Smells good. Alright, I'm just gonna go get something to drink while you finish that up, okay? You want something?
It seems something about that line gets this man thinking.
Okay.
Perhaps he's heard it before.
I want you to just keep your hands right where I can see it there. And I want you to sit right down. Just, keep your hands.
So at that point, the host of the show comes in and talks to the offender and takes him to jail. And now I'm going to talk about current and new laws and policies pertaining to sex offenders. The sex crime wave. Many legal changes have been approved for sex offender laws because of the sudden increase in sexual crime rates. Even though the sex crime rates were stabilized in the early 1990s, between 1992 and 2007, the child welfare system saw a 52% decline in sexual abuse cases. and that was found by Jones and Finkelhor in 2007. Possible reasons for this decline: economic strength, increasing community intervention, and effective psychiatric treatment. Policy changes. The mandatory minimum for half of the United States is 25 years in prison for the first-time felony sex offenders against children. Upon release from incarceration, sex offenders have special requirements to follow for limiting access to their victims and the chance of reoffending. Sex offenders are obligated to register on the Sex Offender Registry. Then the history of Sex Offender Registry. Registration ordinances were first issued in the 1930s and originally for habitual criminal offenders. It wasn't until the 1990s that the similar ordinances were used in a way to reduce crime rates. Washington State started requiring sex offenders released from incarceration to register on their local police department so the community is up to date on the whereabouts of these sex offenders, and several states followed up with the same legislation. In 2009, 687,000 sex offenders nationwide were listed on the Sex Offender Registry, and that was from National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in 2009. Other laws and policies: the Jacob Wetterling Act in 1994 imposed a fiscal penalty to states who fail to implement sex offender registration as well as public notification. Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act in 1996 imposed standardization of state laws pertaining to sex offender registration. Child safety zones are laws created to keep areas safe for the community. They're areas that sex offenders are not allowed to stay or wander. Distant markers are laws created to keep sex offenders away from specific areas. For example, they have to keep 1,000 to 2,500 feet away from schools, parks, and other child-friendly areas. So, have the registration and notification laws affected crime rates? Prescott and Rockoff in 2008 used the National Evidence-Based Reporting System data, found an overall 10% reduction in crime rates. They found evidence that registration has reduced the frequency of sex offenses. The supporting factor is that police departments and officials know the sex offender location. Notification laws were found to deter first-time sex offenders, but have also decreased the recidivism rate as well. Shallon Lee from 2006 used the 1970 to 2002 Uniform Crime Report data for our 50 states. They calculated a 2% decline in rapes that were reported to the police, and this is a small fine, but a decline nonetheless. Treatment for sex offenders. Treatment is fairly common among sex offenders and that population, and many sentences require treatment while in the community. Treatment is focused on victim reporting and working together within the criminal justice system. Recidivism rates can decline with the accurate form of treatment. Treatment programs with cognitive behavioral therapy and psychotherapy are found most effective in a hospital-based setting, found McKenzie of 2006. Efforts of crime prevention. We're going to talk about the history of risk prevention. Risk prevention tools have been an idea within the criminal justice system for years. Before our technical advances recently, inaccuracy was a big issue. Now the new assessments have shown to have a better accuracy than that of clinical prediction. Risk prevention instruments include Static 99, SORAG, and etc. So these are two risk prevention instruments, the RRASOR and SAC-J-MIN. The RRASOR is the Rapid Risk Assessment for Sex Offense Recidivism. Focuses on the issues relating to sexual deviance. And then this is a picture of what the tool looks like. Lower numbers, if they have a lower number, they're a lower risk. Higher number is a higher risk for recidivism. And then the other one is the Structured Anchored Clinical Judgment Minimum. Focuses on the issues of sexual deviance, but as well they focus on non-sexual crime history. And the Static 99 is one of the most frequently used instruments for the assessment of sexual recidivism risk. And this is a combination of the two in the previous slide. The risk prevention is used for adult sex offenders, so juveniles are not able to use this assessment. It's a 10-item scale to predict the possibility of reoffending. And there are the 10 different questions have different answers, and if they only have an answer of 0 to 1, they're low risk. If they have 2 to 3, they're moderate low. 4 to 5 is moderate high, and 6 plus is a high risk of reoffending. Situational crime prevention. Situational prevention changes criminals' ideas of whether they can get away with a particular crime and makes the offender think about the situation, says Sussin of 1992. When the offender actually thinks about the situation and makes it harder, riskier, and less rewarding to commit a crime, says Clark of 1997. Wortley and Smallbone of 2006 suggest 4 techniques to prevent child sexual abuse. Increasing the effort. This goal is to make the crime harder to commit. Increasing the risk. This goal is the need to improve surveillance of locations and kids with adults, like a school coach. Controlling prompts. The goal is to remove situational events that could be sexual abuse situations. So restricting the observation of a mother giving her child a bath. That's seeing a child very vulnerable and naked. Reducing permissibility is the goal. The goal is to understand the link between offender's behavior and the consequences of that behavior. And then future sex crime prevention. Possible future goals to prevent sex crimes. Start evaluating children for the risk and prevention to predict future dangerousness. Educate children on the effects of abuse and promote healthy family structures, and as abuse can cycle through generations. Educate communities on how to prevent victimization and come together as a whole to reduce sex crimes. Technological advances in monitoring sex offenders in the community, and possibly having group homes that provide housing and treatment for sex offenders after they release from the institution. Any questions? Here are my references, and thank you for your attendance.